Did you know that COVID-19 is a global disease that affects not only peripheral countries, but also core countries no matter how powerful they are? Hey everyone, welcome back to another Crash Course video on the Contemporary World series. I am Meldrick Tin and together with me are
Kristelle Bona.
Geanine Balolong.
Javier Delos Reyes.
Back in the previous episode, we were introduced to parallel modernities, learning about progressive critiques of modernity with social transformations not unfolding in a straight line. We are able to refine our understanding of modernity in non-Western societies. This time, we will be talking about the last leg of this series, and we will be focusing on Module 6, Modernity and Inclusive Social Transformation.
This module talks about the inequity and imbalance present in the world as a result of globalization and capitalist incentives. The capitalist system and the hierarchy between races leaves many in an unequal exchange, being especially disadvantageous for countries in the Third World. In line with the prescriptions presented by Immanuel Wallerstein and Walden Bellow, we can counteract this with anti-globalization or deglobalization movements, focusing on relative democratization and relative egalitarianism. It is important that we move into a world with greater decentralization, greater plurality, giving smaller grassroots groups more freedom and independence on determining their own economic strategy, rather than having to conform with strategies built to favor the rich.
Globalization has definitely influenced a lot of aspects in our lives, both positive and negative ways. But the negative influences of globalization were more highlighted in the peripheral countries. One of the results of globalization is the inequalities in the global economic system between third world countries and first world countries, which can lead to compromised healthcare system in the third world countries. These inequalities exist because core countries are taking out money and resources from peripheral countries, which have little power against the core. With this, peripheral countries are left with little resources to address the health issues that are being experienced by their people. COVID has definitely highlighted the Philippines' limited healthcare resources. Many people are getting sick of COVID, yet we have limited resources like hospital capacity. 1 year in the lockdown, first world countries like United States are starting to roll out their vaccines, while the Philippines is just waiting for vaccines to arrive in the country. Because of this, people's health are being compromised as more and more people are catching the virus, even after 1 year of lockdown. Globalization also has an impact on the agriculture sector of the Philippines, specifically the negative effects it has on small and independent farmers. The liberalization program has increased the volume of imported goods and services that enter the Philippines, such as agricultural products. The rice tarification law signed by President Duterte in 2019 removed government limits and restrictions in the importation of rice. Private rice traders are now allowed to bring in unlimited volumes of rice anytime. This has negatively affected the Philippine agricultural industry, especially farmers who now face more competition in their products, because imported agricultural goods are cheaper than local goods despite the tariffs imposed by the Philippine government on these imported goods. As a result, the livelihood of farmers are now at stake. The WTO agreement on differential tariffs also have an impact on the minimum access volume of imports in the country. This means another country that is planning to import goods to the Philippines need to reach a specific amount of goods before exporting to the Philippines. For example, an international agricultural company needs to export a minimum volume of 10,000 sacks of rice. Large-scale agricultural companies in the Philippines would have no problem in money, transportation, and storage in accepting the 10,000 sacks of rice. However, small and independent farmers may not have enough resources to accept these. With this, the WTO agreement regarding minimum access volume of imports favors the large companies while it puts independent farmers at a disadvantage. These issues in the country caused by globalization imposes the imbalances and inequalities between the dominant and marginalized groups. The core countries are at the advantage while peripheral countries like Philippines are at a disadvantage of globalization. Even within the Philippines, the systems favor the rich at the expense of the poor.
We now attempt to analyze the insights and prescriptions presented by Wallerstein and Bello and assess whether these are viable or not, based on our own analysis. Immanuel Wallerstein was not only interested in the beginning or birth of capitalism, but also at the end of capitalism to imagine a more socially inclusive society. This term is going to be capitalism decay, which shows that capitalism is ultimately coming to an end. Today, we will be challenging this idea by first delving into the concept of capitalism. During the pandemic, capitalism is further re-established through the different products that people bank on to increase their profit, which continues to widen the gap between the rich and the poor. We strongly believe that capitalism is possible to end and be completely eradicated to give way for a more inclusive society, but it will take a long time and process for it to completely take effect. In his book, Foretelling the End of Capitalism, Intellectual Misadventures Since Karl Marx by Francisco Baldizoni, he argues that there are four kinds of predictions for the end of capitalism. According to him, there are theories of implosion, wherein capitalism collapses because of the pressures that arise from the workings of its own logic. There are theories of exhaustion, which predict capitalism will die of natural causes. It runs up against environmental limits or moral advances enable people to move beyond it. There are theories of convergence, wherein capitalism and socialism become more and more alike, appearing as mirror images of modern rationality and bureaucratic organization. Finally, there is cultural involution, wherein capitalism kills off the non-economic values that made it work in the first place. Additionally, Module 6 sheds light on how our history and colonization can affect our present and modern times, which further expands on Wallerstein's claim that coloniality was an omnipresent dimension of modernity. This deep-rooting problem came from our colonization period, has left impacts on structural systems that defined our current society. One example of this is how, with the Spanish colonization in the Philippines, which lasted over 300 years, they have imposed their own standards and ideals to our country, which led to the different values being upheld during this time, which also in turn oppressed the minorities in society, such as women.
In terms of free trade and globalization, we recognize that this has caused increasing poverty and inequality in developing countries. The policies of the World Trade Organization lack inclusivity towards developing countries since such policies are difficult to implement, which further pushes them to the peripheries. Instead, the leading and first world countries are those that mostly benefit from trade and globalization as they exploit resources of developing countries, such as cheap labor and raw materials here in the Philippines. This has therefore created a global division of labor and centralization in leading countries such as China and the US, which are currently the main producers of products that are exported at a lower price than their local counterparts in developing countries. The local industries and laborers affected by this trade system would experience significant losses and decrease in demands for their products, since it would encourage citizens to purchase from more affordable imported goods that may even be of better quality. In response to the problem of free trade and globalization, Bello has stated prescriptions to address this problem, such as opposition against the World Trade Organization, deglobalization, decentralization, and the creation of regional financial institutions. By opposing the World Trade Organization, this means that we call for the organization to broaden its scope to include investment, government procurement, and competition policies in order to be more inclusive towards the developing countries and the working class. Moreover, we agree that it would be beneficial if the World Trade Organization would weaken its dominance over developing countries because their policies across the globe only benefits those who are already in power and limits developing countries to determine economic strategies for the benefit of their own. In terms of deglobalization, we agree that it would address the negative impacts of globalization and trade. Developing countries are reliant on exporting their goods and services due to the low purchasing power of local markets. Therefore, this issue needs to be corrected back towards the domestic market. In order to do so, we agree with Bello that it should start with increasing the purchasing power of the local market by providing financial support. However, in the aspect of importing goods, we think that some developing countries, like the Philippines, cannot completely close their doors to imported goods due to the low production capacity of the country. Local resources and production yields in some industries cannot provide for the increasing population. The Philippine agriculture industry alone cannot provide rice for 100 million Filipinos, which would eventually require us to be dependent on imported rice from other countries in order to have enough supply. This results from the low production capacity, which we think would be significantly challenging to resolve. increasing production capacities and yields would require significant investments. However, as developing countries, we also do not have enough resources to do so. Aside from increasing local production capacity and yield, one way to address this issue is for the government to limit the volume of goods coming in the country and impose higher tariffs so that prices of imported goods would be less competitive with local goods. They should also prioritize local products and impose restrictions and rules on importation. While this may benefit the affected sectors and the local laborers, this may negatively affect local consumers since they would have less access to more affordable products brought by free trade. This goes back to the problem on the low purchasing power of developing countries, which would further limit them from having access to affordable needs. Therefore, we think that the root problems that hinder deglobalization are low production capacities and low purchasing power of developing countries, which are the issues that should be addressed first. With this, we strongly agree with Belio that financial support should be provided to struggling economies and classes. The role of the local government would be to distribute wealth not amongst themselves but among the citizens in the peripheries who need it the most. Moreover, the World Trade Organization should also adopt more inclusive mandates that would not exploit resources from developing countries but would be beneficial for their economy and citizens. With this, we see how everything is interconnected in this world system, and criticizing a certain dimension would affect another. Historically, we are able to change the system during the Enlightenment period, from the monarchy system to the current neoliberal system. However, it appears that the current system has disadvantages too. Although it would be certainly difficult to find the perfect system, it would be beneficial to impose changes to the current system in order to address the ongoing faults and concerns, or if possible, change the system as a whole.
Based on our analysis of the module, modernity and inclusive social transformation is possible to go hand in hand together through the eradication of power and class structures in our society. Globalization, despite bringing a number of advancements to our society, is a pressing issue faced by the contemporary society because it paves the way for unequal access to rights between nations from different social classes. To illustrate in our present context, the COVID-19 pandemic, Western countries that are more powerful and have better access to vaccines will have more opportunities for this privilege. But on the other hand, developing countries such as the Philippines will still continue to suffer the effects of the pandemic due to the inaccessible and lack of proper distribution channels. Furthermore, these powerful countries also refuse to give their patents away for these vaccines due to self-interest, even if it means giving viable solutions to deep existing problems such as the pandemic.
Module 6 challenges us to think critically with regards to how capitalism and the issue of globalization have a larger effect and impact on our lives. We were able to delve deeper into the flaws of the current system that we initially did not realize. We only focused on the positive impacts that we have experienced, overlooking the negative impacts experienced by the most affected sectors and economies in the peripheries. Recognizing the flaws of the current societal system has allowed us to be more critical and sensitive towards our actions, and to be more considerate for those that are negatively affected. This serves as a foundation as we further explore and expose ourselves to the flaws of the current system, and possibly come up with our own calls of action in the future.
This has been the last episode of Crash Course Modernity. Comment down below what your own insights and key takeaways are after watching this video. If you found this video useful, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel and stay notified every time we post a new video like this one. Thanks for watching, until next time. Bye!